Happily ever after. Princess Aurora Rose woke, suffocating in heavy corseted gowns. She had sworn she would go right to work, but was surprised by her own skin. "I was older in the dream," she said aloud, surprised by her own voice. Several years had passed with Maleficent. Here she was still 16. She swung her uninjured younger legs around to the side of the bed, where Philip was stretching and yawning. "Wake up, Prince," she said, clapping his shoulder. "We have a lot to do." Their moments of peace and transition ended quickly. Screams, inevitable but still shocking, began to ring out from different areas of the castle. Some people were not waking up. Some people were as dead as they had been in the dream. 3 tiny creatures, red, blue, and green, buzzed into the room and rapidly became familiar, very welcome little ladies. "Aunts!" Aurora cried, surprised by how glad she was to see them. The rush of feeling that overcame her, despite their betrayal merely hours before in this world. She leapt up and gathered them in her arms, squeezing tightly. "Rose!" Fauna cried happily. They all had tears in their eyes, even Merryweather. But still. "We," Aurora whispered in Flora's ear, "will talk. Later." "Well, yes, of course, my dear, but—" "My lady!" One of the faster, smarter guards, Aurora's made a mental note to review him later with a possible eye to promotion, appeared at the door, face haggard and aghast. "The king and queen, your parents, are dead. Murdered. As well as countless other nobles and servants. Here," he added, a little unsure of himself. None of the others who had slept had the advantage of knowing the full story of Maleficent's true intentions, and the point of the dream. Doubtless they would be confused and terrified. "Thank you," she said politely. "Sadly, I am already aware of the situation. This is all the result of the evil that Maleficent wrought." Philip was finally upright, still stretching and grim with the loose ends of the adventure. The guard's eyes kept flicking to the prince's. "I need you to take as many guards as you can and scour the castle for any of Maleficent's servants still remaining," Aurora said. "Kill them all. Afterwards, we need to send a unit to go to her lair and destroy it utterly. Set fire to it and all its contents. I don't want a repeat of recent events. We must make sure that every aspect of her is dead and gone." "Absolutely, my lady," the guard said. He looked relieved that someone was taking charge of the situation, but hesitant about carrying out those orders. "Perhaps Prince Philip or your cousin the Prince of Fandal can both help out with the search," Aurora said, putting some spit into her words. She changed her mind about his promotion. "If they are up to it. All able-bodied men with swords are welcome to do so, nay, encouraged." She moved purposefully out of the room, still with the infinite grace she had been born with, but there was iron immobility to her shoulders. Fauna sighed. "Already a queen, that one." The 3 fairies and Philip hurried after her. In the real world she had been in the castle as an adult for only a few hours, but it was, with some superficial differences, nearly exactly the same as the Thorn Castle. She had no trouble finding the throne room. If nothing else, the sounds of chaos would have led her there. For just a moment Aurora caught herself viewing the room she had destroyed just moments earlier in her mind. The real one was different in ways that made her queasy. Lengths and heights of things were changed, colours and decorations were off. It was set as if for a party. My wedding, Aurora realised belatedly. She stood halfway down the grand staircase she was supposed to have attended with Philip, her arm in his, to greet their parents. Gold and blue tapestries hung everywhere, shiny horns with pennants hanging from the bells flashed in the light. But this was not the scene the musicians had prepared themselves for. Beautifully dressed ladies dragged their priceless gowns through pools of blood and wept. Men tried to comfort them or each other, or they themselves wept. Bodies sprawled on chairs on the floor in terrible poses. "People!" Aurora shouted, trying to channel King Hubert's lusty call from the dream world. Only a few looked at her. One, however, was a horn player. Aurora impatiently gestured at him. He complied immediately. Like the guard before, he was only too happy to have someone giving orders. He played a loud royal flourish, and could perhaps be forgiven if it wasn't perfect. At that, the crowd turned around. Strange noises, murmurs of recognition and astonishment rose from them. They remembered her from their dreams. They remembered the battle, her facing off against the dragon. "Noble ladies and honoured gentlemen," Aurora said as demurely as shouting would allow, "it is a sad day for our kingdom. My heart goes out to all we have lost and those who loved them. I know that no words of mine can stem your grief. Even so, there is much work to do. Those who want in need of immediate assistance, please return to the rooms in which you are staying. Our servants will care for your every need, and we will send for you all as soon as things are tidied. There were a few mumbles of protest, but otherwise everyone who could leave seemed glad to do so. No one went alone. All were in little groups, whispering and discussing and sharing what they remembered, the strange experience they had all endured while asleep. A man in severe black robes and a soft hat strode over to Aurora Rose. Other men in similar robes flowed behind him. They all wore thick golden chains with heavy gemmed pendants on them, ministers or secretaries or some such, Aurora Rose decided, like the ones who had yelled at her in her dream within the dream. It seemed that sometimes sleep did indeed mirror life. "Your Highness, it is very good for you to take this under your own personal direction," the first man began, "but as you are new to the kingdom and have had no experience with such matters, and are a woman, moreover," another man put in, "and a woman," the first man continued, "your delicate constitution might not even survive the viewing of your parents, much less what else needs to be done. What I'm saying is, perhaps you would leave the sorting out of things to us, your father's advisers, and maybe your uncle, Prince Georgie." Aurora Rose regarded him mildly, trying to conjure memories of the beautiful girl full of grace everyone was supposed to fall in love with so easily. "Did I not face down the dragon, unarmed, while the rest of you fled to the protection of the woods?" The man blanched. "I haven't "Oh yes, you remember it well. Please do not pretend it wasn't real," Aurora said firmly, trying not to hiss the way Maleficent would have. "After such an ordeal, believe me, I am quite capable of taking over civic matters. If you have some disagreement with my manner of doing things, you may of course pick it up later in conference with me, privately. Also, from this point on, you will address me correctly as Your Majesty." "Yes, Your Majesty," the man said, nervously glancing at the men around him. None would meet his eyes. "Excellent," Aurora said. "Thank you. I look forward to meeting with you all later to discuss how to proceed." She strode forwards out the knot of men, Philip and the fairies trailing smartly like an entourage. The prince was trying very hard not to smile. It took her a long time to make the short journey to the thrones. Noblemen and women who had looked so alike and unreal in their perfect dresses and matching raiments in the other world became human through tragedy in this one. It took her a moment to recognize Duke Walter of the Five Trees, the short, sensible, middle-aged husband of Lady Astrid. The princess had never had much to do with him in the Thorn Castle, only his wife. His cheeks were wet and red, and he held Lady Astrid's head in his lap, refusing to let anyone take her away. Aurora Rose knelt and clasped his hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He nodded, not really paying attention. Even the brave princess, who fought dragons and saved everyone, including him, couldn't distract his attention from loss and grief. She steeled herself and moved on. The young, powerful, and now dead Marquis and Marchioness of Longbow had left behind 3 children, the oldest of whom was 12. He tried to look brave, but hysteria leaked from the edges of his eyes with tears. "Maleficent hasn't paid enough for her crimes," Aurora Rose murmured after she kissed and hugged each of the children, unable to do anything else for them in the moment. Finally she came to her own tragedy. The bloody and lifeless corpses of King Stefan and Queen Leia still propped up on their thrones. No one had dared touch them. No one knew what the protocol was. Aurora Rose leaned over and looked into their faces, but the dead told no secrets. "I forgive you," she whispered, because there was nothing else she could do. She kissed each one on the forehead, then summoned a servant to cover them and take them away. King Hubert had apparently fallen asleep near the royal couple, having been in discussion with them as they waited for Aurora's arrival. His face was sopping wet with tears, but now he was talking to a guard, to a servant, to a dazed-looking noble, to anyone at all who would listen. "Years I lived in the wilderness after that blasted fairy exiled me. Years. Once I ate some mushrooms out of extreme hunger. Didn't know what they were, but they didn't kill King Hubert, no, I tell you. Takes more than that to take me out. Hey, Philip, my boy!" His eyes lit up when he noticed the couple. "I was just telling this lad here, one of the many Israelites I was leading through the wilderness, like Moses I was, eh, boy?" "Absolutely, father." "Say, I don't suppose your mother came back with the rest of us, did she?" he asked eagerly, looking around the room. "She was lost somewhere too, but maybe she came back?" The prince looked searchingly into his father's face. Something was broken in the old man. Roaming the forest of the dream world by himself for years had indeed altered him, just as he had suggested. Philip wrapped his father in a tight embrace. Aurora saw for just a moment tears quicken in Philip's eyes before he screwed them shut and willed them away. He sobbed a huge, shuddering sob of loss for all the things he had endured but didn't name. The dream world had changed everyone, even the boyish, unflappable Philip. "But what's wrong, lad?" King Hubert asked in wonder. "We're all right now." "Father—" But whatever he was about to say next was interrupted by someone calling desperately from across the room. "My lady!" The guard Aurora had sent off to reorganize the search for Maleficent's servants came running back to her, looking a little pale despite his exertion. "We found something that might be the remains of Maleficent or the dragon," he said unsteadily. Aurora set her shoulders, feeling grim. "Show me," she ordered. She and Philip and the three fairies hurried after him, picking up half a dozen of the more quick-witted guards as an escort. Back through the chaotic throne room, past the tables in the great hall, out to the courtyard and then through the gate, over the drawbridge, like it was no big deal. The princess tried to keep from gawking. She was just walking out of a castle she had seemed to be trapped in for so many years, and the thorns on this one, receding now, were small and pretty and covered in flowers. On the other side of the outer wall, bushes and fields still smouldered from Philip's battle with the dragon. A blackened, steaming crater outlined where the dragon had fallen. Philip's sword was still there, pinning the tattered remains of Maleficent's capes and robes to the earth. But instead of Maleficent lying among them, it was Lyanna. In this realm she was more pig monster than human. Though she still had her beautiful black hair, and wore the vestments of a lady, tusks protruded from her mouth at awkward angles, and her delicate hands ended in strange claws. She looked over at Aurora without moving her head and smiled faintly. "You're still alive," Aurora said, kneeling beside her. Lyanna gave a painful snort. "I was never alive. In this world or the other. I'm just a piece of Maleficent and some dark magic. Semantics. I'm dying now, or a reasonable version thereof. And the last of Maleficent dies with me." Aurora took Lyanna's hand claws in her own hands and squeezed them. "Why did you save me?" "You were my friend," the creature said simply. Aurora felt the tears welling up more than the day could hold. Lyanna's eyes turned towards the sky as if she didn't want to see. I learned that you can care for someone and be cared for by someone. Even if you're not created with that as part of you, you can learn that. Maleficent could have learned that too, but she never did. Things could have been so different. Her breathing was ragged now and growing shallow, the sound made worse by the tusks. She shifted uncomfortably. Biting back a sob, Aurora gestured to Philip. Without needing to ask, he ripped off his cloak and handed it to her. The princess folded up the cloth and placed it as best she could under the girl's head, tucking it around her neck. A look of relief spread over the creature's face. "Thank you. For this and everything." And then, just like that, her eyes grew filmy and still. Aurora let out one desperate cry, a shriek of helplessness, anger, and loss. Philip put his arms around her and held her tightly. "Look," he murmured. Lyanna's face began to shift and melt. Her whole body did. But instead of dissolving into the black hissing soot and filth the demons usually became, her features transformed. Laying dead on the floor before them wasn't a pig thing. It was a young woman with beautiful long black hair and high cheekbones, and black horns sprouting from her skull. A tiny pleasant smile sat on her lips. She looked at peace. "It's Maleficent," Aurora whispered, "as she was. Originally. As she could have been." Philip shook his head and swore, kicking the dirt in frustration. "This," he murmured, "this is our happy ending." Epilogue. All good things. Aurora sat at the head of the ponderous, heavy table, arms resting gracefully, regally on the edges of the throne. She regarded the men putting forth different thoughts on the economic ramifications of consolidating the kingdom's power under a single princess. No queen, no wait, girl, with a gaze that was just a shade warmer than cool, amused detachment. It wasn't an unconscious decision to adopt some of Maleficent's trademark moves. Why not learn from her, even if she'd been an enemy? Behind her throne, to the left, stood Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. Their presence had just a touch of mystical power that kept people in line whenever they started thinking about using the term princess. On her right sat Philip, honoured guest of the kingdom, but he sat away from the table and didn't speak. If anyone tried to address him, he replied with his usual affable demeanour, and directed them to their queen. A tapestry was pulled aside from the door, and the trusted butler entered. "Your Majesty, it's time for the speech. All able subjects have been gathered in the outer bailey." "Thank you, Krista," Aurora said, trying to sound more polite than incredibly relieved. "And thank you, gentlemen. We shall continue the discussions later, after the coronation." She said this warmly, with a smile that made each man in the room feel like he personally was being thanked. Only a few looked unhappy as they filed out. As soon as they were gone, she sank down in her throne, hand to her head. Not that long ago she could have conjured a mug of cider, or caused the squirrels on the table to fly around the room amusingly like a flock of sparrows. But then, of course, she had woken up. "Oh, that was marvellous, simply marvellous," Fauna said, putting a delicate, weightless hand on Aurora's shoulder. "You certainly have a knack for this whole leadership thing." "Yes, it was very well done," said Flora. "You had the meeting out of your hands?" "I think I should turn the one in the corner into a toad," Aurora said, bunching her fat little face into a scowl. Aurora nodded with a faint smile, taking their praise as graciously as she could. They did love her. She had just sort of outgrown their ministrations. "I still haven't forgiven you for lying to me about my parents all those years," she warned them. "Don't think you can flatter your way into my good graces." "No, of course not, dear," Flora said with a sigh. "Please see it from our perspective, however. While we are here, we are bound by the laws of your kingdom, and it was what your parents wanted, Rose." "What my parents wanted? Did they show any great insight or ability in parenting?" she demanded. "Whose idea was it to lock me in a bedroom by myself on the eve of my 16th birthday, and not even introduce me properly to my own parents?" "It made some sort of sense at the time," Fauna said thoughtfully, a finger on her lips. Aurora stared at them blankly for a moment. "I pricked my finger on the spindle, because I thought I would never see Philip again, and my life was over." "Yes, well," Flora said, looking chagrined. "We didn't expect that to happen. Honestly, we never realized how sad you were. You were our first baby." Philip muttered something unprincely and very rude. "Well, you try being bound by human kings and human law," Aurora snapped. "Which of you brilliant house apes came up with the idea of people just inheriting the rule of a land, instead of choosing the best person from the job? We had to do what the king said. Your own rules, people." "We loved Rose. We still do. Even if we didn't make the best choices as parents," Flora said wistfully, touching Aurora's hair. "We'll do better with our next baby," Flora promised. Aurora felt her heart stop. She loved her aunts. She forgave her aunts. She was growing less bitter and angry with every second she spent with them. She did have, in her own way, a freer childhood out in the woods than many a princess did. But she would never, ever give up any child of hers to them. "If I ever have a daughter, you can be sure I will keep her close and teach her well, and school her in the arts of reading and maths and kindness, and make her strong and powerful enough to protect herself. Now I would never let anything come between us." She smiled as she thought the words. "Come on, let's go," Aurora said, rising from the throne and heading to the door. Philip's face still brightened at seeing her moving so gracefully, her golden hair now pulled back in a more business-like plait down her spine. In the antechamber to the speaking balcony, King Hubert was seated comfortably on a padded stool. Several polite-looking men, nobles and servants alike, clustered around and listened. "The thing is, lads, once upon a time I was in an endless dark forest. No, actually endless, I tell you. In another world. I wandered for ages all by myself in the woods. My wife died years ago, you see. I don't know where my oldest boy was. My little girls and lads were safe at home, I think. Once upon a time we were all together, in a castle, you know. But things change. Wives die, and eldest sons grow up and chase after princesses and peasant girls, riding away from you forever." "Good afternoon, King Hubert," Aurora said, kissing him on the cheek. "Young lady," Hubert said with delight, taking her hands in his. "I was just telling them, are you the princess?" "No." He looked at her and paused, searching her face. "No, my mistake. Are you the queen my son is going to marry today?" "Not today, King Hubert," Aurora said with a smile. She brushed a stray lock of snow-white hair out of his eyes. "Oh, well, soon then, I hope. Grandchildren will fix everything, I think," he said pensively. "Grandchildren love stories." "We'll see you in a moment, father," Philip said with a quick formal bow. Then he patted him on the shoulder, unsure what else to do. They looked towards the balcony where hornblowers stood at the ready, gold and blue pennants streaming from their polished instruments. A maid appeared in front of Aurora Rose with a crown resting on a pillow. It wasn't the small princess one the fairies had gifted her with, nor was it the giant golden crowned estate she would be given later at the official coronation. She had gone through the treasury very carefully, and chosen an ancient gold circlet, simple and thick, that would be unmistakable as anything but a crown to the crowds below. Aurora Rose took it and thanked the maid, sending her on her way. "I wish Liana were here," she said, trying to sound a little flippant. Sadness came through anyway, weighing on her as much as the diadem she pressed onto her hair. "She would do something fancy with this, loops, or buns, or something." "You look gorgeous," Philip said, taking her hands and squeezing them. "Don't worry about winning over the people. They're like me. They'll fall in love with you on first sight." "You really did," she said, shaking her head. And perhaps she had once too. She thought about their adventures together, how he had never given up on her, how he had forced her on, how he had constantly, annoyingly remained cheerful and upbeat in any situation, how he had killed demons, and always talked about his stupid horse and ate porridge that he hated. No, she hadn't fallen in love with him on sight the second time around. It had taken a few days. "Hey," she said with a grin. "Ask me a maths question." "What?" "Oh, to prove we're awake," he grinned back. "What's 4 plus 4? 8! Too easy. Give me another." "What's 28 minus 15?
13, again."
"Alright, Princess Smarty Pants. What's 225 divided by 15?
15, silly, it's the square of it."
They both paused, equally surprised by her answer.
"Well, what do you know?" she said slowly. "I really am a Smarty Pants princess."
Philip took her hands and clasped them in his own. "No, you're a Smarty Pants queen." Aurora looked down at their hands and took a deep breath. "Are you going back home after today?" "Yes, I think. I think I have my own, transition of power to deal with," Philip said, looking at his father with a sigh. "I think I might finally have to grow up and do all those things I was trained for." "Hey, at least you were trained for it," she said with a warm smile. "I think you'll do just fine." "You think?" "Absolutely. Also, I think there's going to be a lot of talk about our two kingdoms, with young leaders, young unmarried leaders."
"Can we please drop this for just 2 minutes?
"I'm just saying."
I know, you're right. There are a lot of advantages to combining things."
They were silent for an awkward moment. The noise of the people could be heard below, shouts for the Queen, and exhortations from the guards telling people to calm down. Also just a lot of general yells. "Hey, Queen Aurora," Philip suddenly said, an impish look on his face. "Before this all starts, and things get too complicated, and we have to figure out what we're both going to do."
"Yes?"
"How about a kiss?" Aurora Rose's face broke into a surprised, pleased smile.
"Absolutely. But just a small one."
And Prince Philip took Queen Aurora Rose in his arms and kissed her, deeply and passionately, and she held him tightly, and they drew strength and love and support from each other. And they did live happily ever after, if not exactly the way they originally expected. The end.